Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. We cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Today's chapters are Ezekiel 22 and 23. Now essentially these two chapters plus chapter 24 are about the fall of Jerusalem. Now, do you remember David took his stronghold Zion and he made it, which is Jerusalem, the capital. It was special for a number of reasons. There was the royal throne there. In addition to that, there was the holy altar there. Psalm 132 says, "For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his habitation." So, a very special place for all of Israel, for all of the Jews. But the Gentiles were about to invade. And so Ezekiel 22 explains the reasons why. You have become guilty because of the blood you have shed. They mention the blood you have shed 7 times. And you've been defiled by the idols that you have made. Verse 12 says, "In you," this is Jerusalem, "are people who accept bribes and shed blood, and they take interest and make a profit from the poor." So there's injustice, there's idolatry, there's bloodshed. Then the word of the Lord came to me, "Son of man, the people of Israel have become like dross to me. All of them are like copper, tin, iron, lead, left inside the furnace. They are but dross and silver. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. As silver, copper, iron, lead, and tin are gathered into the furnace to be melted in a fiery blast, so will I gather you in my anger, and inside my city I will melt you." Now, I'm standing here in my dad's workshop, and this is a furnace. The back here is a spout where the pure molten liquid comes out, and then inside here all the raw materials gets put in, and the dross is left in. It's caught in these sieves that are on top here. And so he's basically saying, you are like the dross, the dregs that's left over after my fire has burned through you. So he's basically saying, the other side of this punishment, I'm wanting to see purity. But at the moment, this is what you are. You are going to suffer fire and be like dross. And so he explains why. He says your officials were like wolves tearing their prey. The prophets whitewashed these horrible deeds by their false visions and their lying divinations. And he says, I looked for somebody who would stand on the wall and would build a wall and stand in the gap on behalf of the land, but I couldn't find anybody. So trouble is coming. So now you might say, well, God, that's a long time ago. It's the people of Israel. It's the same God, yesterday, today, and forever. Now we are recipients of his grace. We're recipients of his mercy. But remember in Romans 11, it says, behold, the kindness and the severity of God. Our view of God's very important. He's not just merciful, kind, and loving, but he's holy and he's righteous. Now in chapter 23, Ezekiel changes his picture to that of 2 sisters. He says they were born in Egypt. So immediately there we know this is Israel. This is the people of God. Remember, they came into Egypt as the 12 sons of Jacob, and there became a nation of millions of people. But then he says 2 sisters. Why 2 sisters? Why not just one? Well, in the time of Rehoboam, remember the son of Solomon, Israel split into the northern kingdom. Israel had as its capital Samaria, and immediately they became disobedient, they became idolatrous, and they made their own temple. And so the name that he gives them is Olohah, which means I have my own tent. They sort of set up their own set of worship. And then Aholibah, which is the name he gives to Judah, which is the southern kingdom, which his capital is Jerusalem, is that my tent is in you. So this is what happens, and this is what we see here. He gives a little historical picture of these 2 sisters. The older sister, the Samaria, immediately gets into prostitution, immediately becomes idolatrous, immediately does its own form of worship, and it's despicable. They're burning their own children, they're worshipping idols, and then what happens is they get around about 720 BC, they get taken off into slavery. About 100 years later, he's now speaking to Judah and to Jerusalem, And he's saying, this is going to happen to you too, because you followed the way of your sister. Now, when you read this, you see this very graphic imagery of adultery and promiscuity. And the reason he's giving that image is he's basically saying, under the law, adulterers and prostitutes like this would have been stoned, because they're dismantling marriage, they're dismantling families, etc., etc. And he's saying, this is the same picture. You, Jerusalem, you, Judah, are now going to go the way of the adulterer and the prostitute. You are going to get, in fact, he says it a number of times, I'm going to hand you over to your lovers, and they are going to sort you out. Now, as we look at these verses, we see God's longing for his people to come back to him. Remember in the first chapter we saw, he said, silver's going to come out of this. But while they're behaving like this, he says, I'm going to hand you over to your lovers. And at the end of it, we know the church becomes his bride, and he works a way to get people back in relationship with him again.